Thank you. Just age. You haven't experienced that yet, right? It was flashing before. What did that mean? No, it's steady. Okay, tonight we're continuing with chapter 9 of the Avatamsaka. And we're on the last verse of this section, which I think is around page 24, 25. The Chinese, we've been through this, is Hojian Xinji Jing Rushi Deng Yong Mei. Everybody know where that is? Okay. I have page 26, but I think it's a little different in your text.
Yeah, 24, 25.
24, 25, okay. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's contributing to this work. I'm just sort of holding a spot here for this Avatamsaka Sutra to have a place to turn its wheel in the modern world. I'm not the only one doing this, for sure. Dharma Master Sure is doing it in Australia, and I think others are doing it as we talk, but it's not a common occurrence. It's very rare to encounter this text. I don't think, having not met my own teacher, I would have maybe even glanced at this. That being said, it's also a collegial project to work on this. So I hold this place on a Friday night, but there's people here in the room who are working together to investigate this, to look into it, to help translate it. And then there's quite a few people online who are, I guess, online, virtual. I mean, they're real people. They're not virtual people. They're real people. I'm sure you don't feel like you're a virtual person, even though we're not here in the same room, who are also following along, looking at the text, looking at the Chinese, the translation, and getting involved with what's been called the work of devas, the work of the gods, which is to translate these into languages of the world. So I want to thank people who, particularly last week, sent me some emails and texts regarding something we're wrestling with. One is the section of the verse that we're looking at here, and I'm going to do our translation. Perhaps someone sees his mind still and silent. And I would also get rid of that and get rid of is. See, these are unnecessary. It's very direct. Perhaps someone sees his mind, the mind of a Buddha, still and silent, like a lamp in the world, forever extinguished. And you could even there again get rid of that is. And I think especially when we're doing verses in verse form, we want to cut it down to something that's more terse and really hits the imagery and the primary language without a lot of the fillers with infinitives and connectors. So that's a passage we're looking at. And someone sees his mind still and silent, like a lamp in the world forever extinguished. And I think, again, based on what people were writing, and I think this is right, one of my Dharma friends wrote that I suggest that maybe it was a scribal error, the sure for the world. In other words, you have it occurring if you look at the Chinese, we have ru shi, like world, deng yong mie. And then below you have the last two characters, ru shi. So it's the same ru, but it's a different shi. The top character is world, or worldly, and the bottom of the last line is in that way, like that. The shurs is to be, so like it is being that way. And I thought, this was my stab. I didn't stand behind this definitively, but I thought, yeah, maybe it's a scribal error. Maybe it should be ru shur both, like a lamp. But then somebody did a little research on this and found that this is a fairly common occurrence. And this helps us with translation because sometimes you can actually just skip the word itself completely. In this case, the sure for world is just basically not a scribal error, but meaning in our everyday experience, ordinarily. So it's just describing an ordinary lamp. And therefore, I don't think we have to translate it. It's not a worldly lamp. That's really kind of awkward. We don't talk about worldly and world-transcending lamps, at least normally you don't. So here, you're just basically using this to say it's commonly, like a common metaphor, the text is going to. Nothing special here. So you can just drop lamp. And then you have something like, I'm trying to look at this. Perhaps someone sees his mind still and silent, like a lamp that is, and drop out in the world, a lamp that is forever extinguished or gone out. Okay, so I appreciate that because I myself don't have the time that's necessary for me to really go in and look at some of the commentaries and tease this out. And maybe I don't also have the breadth of knowledge to do these kind of cross comparisons, but I really appreciate that people listening online who have the time and who have this kind of special knowledge contribute. Send me text and email, because this really helps open this up for our investigation, understanding. The other thing that came up is then, well, what does that lamp mean, forever extinguished? And there, we're going to go into that a little bit tonight, because that's often used interchangeably as a metaphor or an analogy for nirvana, the Buddha's entering or attainment of nirvana. But before we do that, say this. It's a very complicated discussion, investigation. What exactly is meant by nirvana? And what is it meant by somebody attaining, here we ru, which means to enter, but it's a verb that can mean to accomplish, to achieve, to realize, literally to enter. What does that mean? This is very interesting. We say it quite a bit. People say they want to attain nirvana. They say the Buddha has entered, or Buddha enters nirvana. But then it's left kind of vague. And the metaphor of the lamp could make it clear or not. If you think of the lamp as a flame that's going out, then you could interpret it as, well, it's a metaphor for the passions, and the klesha are extinguished, the heat, the fanna, which is a heated brain, the heated afflictions have been extinguished. They're cool and quiet. So you can use nirvana as a flame that's blown out. But then this also, we use lamp as a metaphor for illumining and shedding light. Now the lamp has gone out, the Buddha's entered nirvana. Then it's also used interchangeably in this tradition, which I don't like. People say when someone has passed or died, they've entered nirvana. So this gets a little tricky. The light's gone out, the lamp's gone out. So this is a very sad passage. If you say, like a lamp that's gone out, the Buddha's gone, the light's extinguished, and we're in the dark again. So the other problem I have with, say, like one of my nieces who encounters this phrase, and she said, oh, I just heard the higher state in Buddhism was nirvana, and then when your teacher died, people said he entered nirvana. So does that mean dying is entering nirvana? Which is a negative association. It's not association of liberation, but it's sort of like a polite way of saying they're dead. So this becomes not simple to work through. One of my students sent this interesting take on this that goes back to some of the Vedic text. And this has the idea that in a deeper sense, a fire is not extinguished, but it returns to its elemental state. So we often say when someone passes away, the fire in their body isn't extinguished, it just returns to the fire in the universe, the element of fire. Earth returns to earth, air returns to air, and water returns to water. So those four elements come together to hold us for a while, to put us together. And then at the time of our passing, they start to fall apart, but they return back into the four elements distributed throughout the universe. This is very much in keeping with the idea of the conservation of matter and energy, that nothing is produced or destroyed, but it's just simply going through continuous transformation. Okay? So from this early sort of Vedic understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, I'm just saying one of my students passed this along to me, that the fire then is unbound. It's unbound from its locus of the candle or the lamp or our body, and it's present everywhere. In other words, it's not, quote, extinguished, it's just universally present everywhere. So these are two different ways of looking at the same thing of extinguished. It could be that means extinguished, the passions are extinguished, but not the being is extinguished. Now, if you go with the other element and saying it's not extinguished, but it's unbound, it's released from its being held in the candle or the flame, then it goes the idea of translating nirvana as unbinding or unbound, liberated. So there's different ways we can work on this. But even there, I'm not completely satisfied because maybe this too is too concrete. To say it's everywhere is really to locate it. And from my understanding of nirvana, even that's too concrete. This has to do with the limitations of words and language. So I want to go into this more. I'm just saying tonight we're not going to solve it, but at least I think we can say it's an ordinary lamp that's being used as an analogy here for the state of nirvana. And the other way this helps me too is one of my students pointed out that this whole section of verses prior to this is basically, how should we say it? I'm looking up what the actual expression is. They're said to be when a Buddha or an enlightened being manifest, appears in the world, each and every Buddha shows different stages or signs of their development. And these are called the 8 signs or the 8 stages of spiritual attaining the way. And if you look at the verses above, you'll see this. It's called the Ba Xiang Cheng Dao. 8 Xiang, marks. Cheng, to accomplish Dao, accomplishing the way. The 8 marks accomplishing the way. Every Buddha manifests these, it said. And so if you go back now to these verses, we'll see, oh, yeah, here they are. And this is a very important passage in that sense because this is saying what somebody sees. Remember, perhaps someone sees. So they're seeing a manifestation or appearance of a state of spiritual development that each and every Buddha shows. And these are recurring motifs, if you will, of an enlightened being. And these are what people see. Now, what's behind them? Is it real or is it manifestation? That's a different question, but I think the way the text uses it here, they see this. This is what is manifest for them to see, which then makes sense of the chapter, which is the, how do we translate it? It's the releasing of light. We try luminous awakening, but it's also referring to the fact that the Buddha, in his very life, an enlightened being, okay, let's use an enlightened being, with their virtue and their cultivation, emit, manifest light, insight, but actual light. And this radiance of person, this radiance of accomplishment, is then seen by others and causes them to resolve on Bodhi, to aspire to Bodhi. So it's an embodied releasing of light. So these, when someone sees, it matches the chapter's thing of the light enlightenment, the awakening through the illumination brought by the light of this being's life. And that's why sometimes the biographies and autobiographies are so important, because even if you didn't have the chance to be side by side with such a being, in reading the biographies and autobiographies, you should be able to bathe in that light a bit, to get a bit of that light. And that light in turn kindles your own light. So this is in a sense, the flame goes up, but the flame also passes on. So this I like in the terms of it's not an extinguish, but a passing on. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas continue to manifest and be in the continuation of their light and their vows and so forth, however that might be. And that might be through other living beings. It might be through other worlds. It might be through nature itself. But it's not destroyed, it doesn't go out, it just simply transforms and spreads. This, I think, is at the heart of transference, the concept of transference in Buddhism. Okay. So if you see this, I'm going back to the verses, perhaps someone sees him first being born, the first stage, being born. Then Buddha's walking, the second one. And then someone sees his marks and characteristics. The lion's roar, which is the teaching. Then the leaving home, another stage. The victorious hero accomplishing the way, Changdao. And then turning the Dharma wheel, sitting in the way place, enlightening beings and so forth, and sounding the lion's roar and so forth. And then finally, this last verse we come to tonight, the seemingly passing away of the completion of the cycle of stages. So again, I appreciate what people have shared with me along these lines because it really helps illumine the chapter a bit. And it also helps clarify the murkiness of some of our terms and concepts, and we have to look into more, like this idea of nirvana. So, any questions on that? Anything? Is that helping a little bit? I'm just trying to share with the help that I've got from other people here. The Jijing, which is the still and silent, this again is sort of the common English expression, but it can be mistaken to be something sort of like a withdrawn trance-like remove. And I think what here, it's actually very dynamic. So the still and silence is actually the perfection of movement and stillness and movement. It's not oblivion, it's not a trance. So, example, when you look, even if you look at good statuary, if you look at a good statue like the three that are up here behind me, they seem to be still and silent, especially since they're images and they're not moving. However, I don't think that's the feeling you get off of that. You get a dynamic, energized flow of something here. So right in the stillness, right in the silence, there's an incredible movement. And I would say the converse is often true. You look at people who are really moving and active, and sometimes you get a dead energy from it. It's a burning out. So the stillness and silence of these images, not to say encountering a Buddha in the state of this sort of, I don't know what they say, still and silent, but I would say a calm and a quiet, free from distress, free from temptation, free from anxiety, but very much alert, aware, and present. So this is a movement and stillness kind of phenomena. It's a fullness of awareness and lucidity. It's an unimpeded clarity and full mental functioning. That's what still and silent means. It doesn't mean zonked out. It's a totally centered awareness. So the stillness and the silence have to do with the calming of the klesha, the calming of anxiety, the calming of random scattered thinking and emotions. And yet, in that calmness, it's sort of like the sun. You can see the sun as still and silent, but you realize it's a dynamic ball of incredible energy. So it's this kind of image I want to get with the still and silent, because also sometimes people think still and silent is this vacated, almost zombie-like, what's the word we use? On life support, sort of image, someone's still and silent. That's not what's being conveyed here. In fact, the still silence, when you encounter it, is almost unbearable. When you encounter someone of this status doing still and silence, it's like being in a nuclear generator. The energy is just profound and moving. But it moves you to your best part of yourself rather than moves you off center. So being centered hums. It hums. And I think that's what's being described here. Sometimes it's used in the term of wondrous stillness. And then we get the very seemingly paradoxical thing, true stillness or true emptiness is just wondrous existence. And wondrous existence is just true stillness and emptiness. And these seem to be opposites, but actually they're very much complementary aligned. So that's what I think we're trying to get at here that's being described. Give you a passage, this is from the Avatamsaka prologue to kind of support where I was going here. It says, the Buddha, the world-honored one, settled into a wondrous stillness. Settled into a wondrous stillness. And then the next line, compassion and wisdom were both employed. Whoa, wait a minute. Settled into a wondrous stillness, and then compassion, which is engaged, relational, powerful, and wisdom that guides the compassion, were both employed in the wondrous stillness. So this is a hint to say that the compassion and wisdom we hope to manifest ourselves doesn't come from trying so hard to be compassionate, but somehow accessing this wondrous stillness. And then it's naturally accessed by itself. This is actually from the prologue. And then it says, his conduct and vows in the wondrous stillness, his conduct, his activity, and his vows are of equal power and scope now. So this is full functioning. Power of vows and conduct, his activity, are of equal scope. His activity is guided by his vows guide the activity, and then compassion and wisdom are both employed. This does not sound like life support. So this is a very different, I think we have to look at these terms and really take them apart like this. This is talking about the full functioning of your innate human potential. You're at the top of your game, to use a kind of colloquial expression. And then the passage from the prologue goes on, in this state of wondrous stillness, he suddenly was clear about the 10,000 dharmas and then used unimpeded liberation to set forth his wondrous teaching. Wow. So you see, after the wondrous stillness, it's not but it's now activated to the next level. He can really teach and transform. He can clearly see the nature reality, the 10,000 things as they are, and use that unimpeded liberation that the stillness and the wondrous calm brought to really now engage fully. And this is the description of a bodhisattva. But it's also used as a description of a Buddha. So then we're back to this question, what's the difference? Another evening we go into this. Let me just say a little bit more about this. I've been working on this for a long time and trying to get a handle on this idea of nirvana. The Sixth Patriarch, for example, describes it not as an after-existence state, but a here and now state, a profound liberated freedom from klesha and understanding. It's one of the meanings of zidzai, self-ease, presence. One is completely unbound, liberated, and freely moving. And one of the phrases that's used here is it said, because there's great wisdom in this state, the bodhisattva does not dwell and get attached to the world. But because there's great compassion, the bodhisattva does not linger in a removed nirvana. This is really interesting because a compassion does not enter nirvana as a final, and because of wisdom does not does not get attached to the world. So then it's described, it's a state in between, constantly like a ferry boat captain going back and forth, rescuing beings across this divide. So that's one way that nirvana then is the freedom here and now from all klesha, from all afflictions and ignorance and bad habits and so forth. It's the actual realization of your deepest human potential. But they also refer to a nirvana that comes after this life. But here we have to be careful because I don't think it's referring either to a non-existence. In other words, you're extinct and dead like a dinosaur or dodo bird, and that's it. And there's no traces left. Nor would I argue, and some people might disagree with me, is it referring to an eternal existence, like the earlier Vedic interpretation, which means it just returns to this eternal existence. Because if I read the text carefully, the existence, non-existence is a false dichotomy that's being posed in these teachings. Damn, so either it's existing or not existing, what is it? And you say, oh, you're just being tricky. I'm not being tricky. I'm not being tricky. The texts are being, if you want to use the word tricky, but they're purposely that way. And you see it a lot because our ordinary minds get caught up in dualities. So now we're back to this idea of dualities. And it's going to be either exist or doesn't exist. It's black or white. It's either worldly or world transcending. It's either living beings or Buddha. And so because of this duality thinking, and all of our language basically comes out of a dualistic construct, I'm saying it's probably something closer to an absolute freedom from all constraints of time and space and being and not being. In other words, the Buddha presents this, and the Sixth Patriarch does the same thing. For those attached to existence, they speak of non-existence. Those attached to non-existence, they speak of existence. Those attached to permanence, they speak of impermanence. Those attached to impermanence, they speak of permanence. What are they doing? They're trying to break the binding, the dualistic binding of self and others that underlies the unawakened mind. So they're trying to speak language that doesn't fall into the trap of dualistic either-ors. At the same time, they have to say something, or it's left none. So the words that are used are, in a sense, false, or they're fabrications. And those fabrications of language cannot properly be used to describe anything outside the realm of fabrication. The true nature of reality. So this is the trick, if you call it a trick. So these words point to another way of seeing and understanding, but they are not to be understood as the understanding itself. This is what the Avatamsaka means when words and language are provisional, they're false, but we use the false to point to find the true. So this is the problem with these texts. On one hand, we want to take them as dogma, and this is the way it is. But we have to understand they're given to us as catalyst to point us to something that is beyond the words and language themselves. And just as a teacher exists, not to have you depend and rely on him or her as your refuge, but merely to use him and her as a boat of transference to get you from one place to the other. Once you reach the other shore, to use a raft analogy, you can leave the raft behind. In the same thing, you see the passage in the Sixth Patriarch. The Patriarch says, they're rowing across the river, being sent off, and he says, oh, well, the master rows when the student doesn't understand, but once the student understands, then the student rows. And it's a play off this exchange that I'm pointing to here. So words point to another realm where the sixth sense objects and the sixth sense organs cannot really get to. But beyond that, something can be experienced. And I'm saying I don't think it's in terms of existing or non-existing, which is back to ours. So I'm saying I would really relate it to something like a freedom from, an absolute freedom from all constraints, all dualities of time and space, and even being and not being. Now, the difficulty with this is we're left unsettled, and I think we're meant to be. We're left unsettled because these words and language are meant to be put a fire under our butts, so to speak. It's to prompt us to realize that the way we construct and see things is really like looking through the world in a straw. But at the same time, the encouragement is there is to see things directly, immediately. And this is what self-cultivation is all about. It's getting a handle on the diluted apparatus mechanisms that we use for thinking, the six sense organs, the six sense consciousness, setting up all these dharmas. But without a method to get beyond that, this just becomes a nihilistic dead end, or becomes just a kind of mysterious teaching. And that's where I think self-cultivation is proposing that by cultivating oneself deeply and getting rid of the attachments and deluded thinking, when that mad mind, that mad fabricating mind stops, that very stopping is this bodhi nirvana. And that is that absolute freedom. That is neither existence nor non-existence, neither emptiness or so forth and so forth. So I'm trying to push the envelope a little here, but I think it's really important. Let me give you a passage I really like to illustrate this. I've used this before. This comes from the 10 Grounds chapter of the Avatamsaka, the Dasha Bhumi. Those of you know this. And at this point, the text is describing the state of wisdom that a Buddha realizes here, and I've been playing with. When the Buddha's in nirvana, does the Buddha exist or not exist? And the Buddha would say yes, no. Okay, because what's being described is something beyond that dualistic framing. So here the text says, this state of a Buddha is born of wisdom. Not intellect, not philosophy, not even philosophical inquiry, because that's only pointing to. It's born of wisdom, and it's difficult to express and difficult to accept. It's really interesting how it puts it. This is a state that's difficult to put into words, and it's difficult to accept when we do, because our ordinary mind just goes back and then tries to fight with it, tries to wrap our mind around it. It is not thought, cogitation, and leaves the path of the mental workings of the mind. The place of the mind's workings is extinguished. It's another Chan verse. The skandhas, the realms and places, are not its gateway, and the wise no intellect cannot reach it. Wow. So what this is pointing us to is, as interesting as the text may be, the interesting thing is maybe a Friday night class could be, the real penetrating thrust of understanding comes through self-transformative practice, not through the intellect, not this inquiry. And then the text goes on and says, what is it like? It's like the traces of a bird in an empty sky. The bird flies. There may be a trace, a little trajectory trail, but it's so thin, it's difficult to express, hard to discern, says the text. That's what it's like. I'll finish this passage. Incomprehensible to mind and thought, but from compassion, kindness, and the power of vows, these states appear and one can enter. This is very interesting. It's incomprehensible to mind and thought, but from compassion and from kindness and vow power, intentionality, these kind of wisdom states appear, they manifest directly, and one can enter and unite with them. Gradually there is perfection of the mind. Then the famous line, wisdom's practices are not reflections realm. Then the final passage of this 10 Grounds chapter verse, such states as these are difficult to perceive. They can only be known, not expressed. Only through an enlightened being's power are they proclaimed. Receive them with all reverence. This is a beautiful verse passage from the Avatamsaka, but I think it maps out maybe if we spent night after night trying to define what nirvana was and going through all the texts and straining our minds with our intellect trying to reach them, I think the text is hinting to us this is not how they're known. But they can be known, they can be experienced, even though they can't be described. And this is what makes them, I think, for me, much more compelling and interesting, is because they are real in that way. It is something you directly know and experience. Anything that I think and speculate and conjecture, however clever it might be, I know in my heart of hearts, it's just a fabrication. It's a word game. It's not the real thing. Most of my real experiences are things you directly, viscerally encounter and feel. You know immediately. They're palpable almost. They're undeniable. And I think that's where this text is taking us. But at the same time, I want to express they're not mystical. They're very real and accessible. They're right within the reach of the human. So I'm sorry I spent as much time on this, but I wanted to bring out this idea a little bit. Maybe I'll pause there and stop this for tonight and just say, I was going to go say some more about non-duality, but I'll save it for our next class, because as we go forward here into the next section, which we'll start next Friday, non-duality comes up again. And so maybe I can use that as a launching pad to come back to this, because what I've expressed last class was bu'ar, this non-duality, is an extremely important concept for us to understand, not only in the theory, but more importantly in our practice. But I want to just say this for the night here, and then we'll come back to this. Non-dual does not mean one. If the text wanted to say one, they would say one. They don't say one, they say not two. I think this is very interesting. It means, non-dual does not mean identical, undistinguished sameness. For example, you looked at the text when it says, living beings and Buddhas, bu'ar. Afflictions and bodhi, bu'ar. Worldly and world transcending, bu'ar, not two. It doesn't mean they're the same. That's absurd. If you say living beings and the Buddhas, then why cultivate? We're all Buddhas already. I'm a living being, I'm a Buddha, one and the same? No. And if you say afflictions and bodhi are exactly identical and the same, it's absurd. It doesn't make sense. Bodhi's cool, released, no trouble, everything's okay, no problem. Afflictions are fire, irritation, anxiety. So we have to understand here that non-duality doesn't mean everything's the same. That's not what it means. It means something closer to not unrelated, not distinctly separate, not unrelated, not the exact same thing, but continuous, commingled. Okay? So I think this is really key for us, because a lot of times this gets translated, everything's one. No. That's not what bu'ar means. If everything's one, then we're done. We're okay. Everything's cool. And actually, in the 60s, some people are interpreting this as, oh yeah, Buddhas and living beings are non-dual. I'm a Buddha then. Eat, drink, and be merry. I'm a Buddha. No. It doesn't mean that. So we'll come back to this in this next passage, because I think it's really important to understand, both in theory, but also in application. I say this because I find a lot of people think bu'ar means exactly identical, the same, and it doesn't mean that. Can't mean that. That would be silly. So then the question is, if they're not the same, what is that relationship? What is that about? This becomes an extremely important concept to understand, because then it helps us understand not self and emptiness, and also two very key concepts in the Dharma, but also very grossly misunderstood. And they're grossly misunderstood because they're not put into the context of bu'ar. And once we put it in that context, you go, oh, I see what that means now. So, next class, we're going to do a contemplative practice this coming week at the city, 10,000 Buddhas with the university, a contemplative bowing, heart cleansing practice. So I'll be going up there, spending time with everybody to do that, and then we'll be back next Friday night. So anyways, who's talking tonight? Okay? Dharma Master Chen Wei is going to talk, and then make, if there's any announcements.
I heard a week ago, Jin Chuancher said a few words about the retreat, 3 months retreat, what we just started. And maybe I want to give also some updates after the 7 days of practicing together. The Redwood Vihara in Berkeley. And it's quite rich. Quite rich. A few days ago, Marty came to the monastery. He was working on his stuff, and I told him that being in this retreat is like being in the classroom 24/7. And Marty replied to me, if it's not 24/7, it's not true learning. And I think this is something very true about the theme of this and the underlying principle about this being in this retreat. And it's truing our hearts, truing our intentions, deeply ask who we are, where we go, why we are here. So all of us deeply look at in our hearts and try to find this kind of authentic, true voice to learn what is true. And what is true is, Marty says, is kind of tightening all the knots in the heart, for releasing all these years of stuck worries, unfinishing businesses, and so forth. So for a few days, our team was to deeply look in our intentions, kind of put the mirror to ourselves. Why I am here? And as of 6 of us, kind of choose a different kind of themes, different qualities that we want to deeply look at, develop. And someone says, I want to learn what it means to be according with. Someone says, be accord with others, be in harmony. Others says, I want to learn to let it go. How it is to let go. How does it feel to let go? Someone else says, I want to learn how to open heart. Our heart often, very, very often are closed, somehow broken. We don't trust this part. It's scary. And we want to go deeper. What is there? Someone says that I want to learn how to have a kind of loving acceptance, loving kindness. Learn how to not judge ourselves. So, from a few days we look at in this true me, right? How to learn to be true in myself. And we're doing this not just as a solitary approach or solitary retreat. We work as a group, right? We wake up 4 a.m., do morning ceremony with meditation. We eat together, work together, a lot of hours. We can say co and co in the classroom, inside and outside, truing our hearts. And we see this. Marty mentioned before about the spiritual powers. And in some sense, we're learning the power of spiritual friendship, power of spiritual support that we realize we cannot do ourselves. It's very difficult. Buddha says that the friendship is the 100% of the spiritual path. And it's so true. It's so true. I think any of us can touch to this place that support is needed in this path. So we learn from me, we move to we. We are together. We are deeply connected. It's kind of irony. We went to retreat to reconnect. So it's not retreating, it's connecting in this kind of truth which we together explore, and all these intentions we support. It's not just I'm learning, let it go. I'm learning also how to be accordingly. I'm learning how to practice loving kindness, how to care, how to change. And maybe just so many things happen. We try to capture this moment. We try to share if the time would be right. Maybe future website. The future website. We have a very powerful ceremony one day. We sit in the circle in the middle of Kindle, small kind of mandala, very kind of Californian flavor to some extent, Indian. So we sit in the circle, and the purpose of it was to deeply reflect for whom we want to dedicate these 3 months of practice and investigation. Who want to benefit? Because it's not just me, it's not just we are very interconnected. So all of us took the pieways, as we sometimes translate dedicated merit plaques, and each of us took pen and wrote names. Family members, friends, those who we hurt, those who we are grateful for, those who we wish well. Someone dedicate to all of the participants, someone the merit from the whole practice, someone for the forest and for the whole community. So micro, macro, we all interrelated in very deep sense. And we very felt it this. It was quite powerful. And we asked the question, why each of you deeply care? What you wish for this person specifically? And we opened something very deep. People start sharing from heart. The tears appear, the kind of cleansing tears of repentant, those who we heard. Maybe actions came out what were unskillful, bring pains and tears for others. It was quite deep, very deep, very transformative. Kind of the air change in the whole circle. And we recite the Buddha's name for those who are alive, and put these plaques for long life. Each of us stand up and put their 2 plaques. Recite the medicine master Buddha for those who are alive and those who pass away, Amitabha's name. And we transfer merit. And it was very clear for us that it's not we just are we, is this we move from we to us. All of us carry in our heart the whole web of relations. All people in the past, teachers, parents, grandparents, ancestors, whole lineage of people who are here, even when we retreat, they stay with us in our hearts, in our minds. And it was quite powerful. We retreat to really reconnect, truly reconnect, learn to reconnect. And what was very touching and moving for me after this ceremony, after a while, we have an evening ceremony like you do every day, 6:30. What really hit me, the quality of the sound that came out of all of us. It was different sound. very harmonious, very clear, resonate, strong, and gentle at the same time. And I can feel in this sound this deep gratitude that we are the part of it. Gratitude for all lineage of teachers, those who support us unconditionally in this journey. Gratitude for parents, for the nature, for the earth, for the animals, for Redwood Forest, where we are, were very kind of difficult to describe in words. Marty says it's something in deeply in the heart, but very obvious that our practice is kind of no more just my practice. Every sound, every chant, we connecting to all of those who we care, who are close to us, to the strangers, but with this wish to send wishing of being well, happy. And it was quite transformative. It was very kind of touching for me to knowing that through the ceremonies, being together, how we passed all these differences. We came from 4 continents, different countries, different ages, experiences. But it is the place when we connect in true sense, from kind of heart to heart, nature to nature, support ourselves and others' journey and kind of move forward. And I think this is a kind of true learning, learning how to be true. And this is so far our day number 7. We see how it goes. We give you reports, but it's quite transformative in a very deep sense experience. Okay.
Great. Any announcements?
Yes. So tomorrow we are going to Redwood Vihara, to Redwoods. So we will cancel, right, Jinchuan, our morning sharing and 3 steps, 1 bow. So it will be, if people who join our practices in the morning, they can meditate themselves, they recommend, without kind of our monastery online streaming. We also, tomorrow, Jinpoche at 2:30 will do his weekly... 2 o'clock, sorry. 2 to 3:30. 2 to 3:30, his Amitabha session, Amitabha, Buddha's name chanting. At 7:30 p.m. Monk Heng Sure will continue his lecturing on Avatamsaka Sutra, as he do. It's online, of course. Sunday in the morning, 6:30, we do monthly recitation and dedication of merit of Great Compassion Mantra recitation, the whole group. In the world, from many countries recite since the pandemic started the Great Compassion Mantra. And every month we transfer the merit together to practice the Dabejo recitation. Not sure anything else? And you can find all the information on our website, our daily practices and lectures. And
say that probably for the whole next week we won't be having our 3 steps, 1 bow and the Dharma reflections.
oh yeah,
Because we have the CI here for you.
yeah.
We'll start again on Friday. Let's say that.
Yeah. So right. So the whole our group will join the retreat at Dharma Buddhist University. So from this coming Monday to Thursday will be no morning sharing 3 steps, 1 bow. We'll continue do these activities and sessions on Friday, start from next coming Friday. So we have to put some information on the website too, right, about this. Yeah. Okay, so this is...
I was just going to say, for people who are just beginning, and tonight's talk about sort of coming deeply from the heart, not just the intellect, to cultivate the human, cultivate the fully human. You mentioned the Great Compassion Mantra. This is a particular school of teachings within the Dharma that is meant to tap into and activate a kind of knowledge and a kind of action that doesn't rely on words and language and intellectual understanding. Nonetheless, it's very powerful and dynamic. And so I would encourage people, if you're just beginning to practice and you want a Dharma door that allows you to use your mind and body and words and energy in a way that isn't discursive, intellectual pondering and reasoning, but is very powerful, memorize this mantra. Get the mantra memorized. And then once you've memorized it, make it a daily practice to recite it 1 time, 7 times, 108 times is a standard way of doing it. I once asked my teacher after I memorized it, I was going to do it 108 times a day. I said, well, I did it 108 today, what now? He said, do another 108. He said, with a Great Compassion Mantra, the more the better. And if you think about just making your mind and your heart go to some way that you want to impact the world with all the horrible stuff that's happening from the lack of compassion and kindness, one way to do it without getting afflicted of blaming people and struggling is just simply put the sound of that mantra into your heart and into the air. And don't try to feel, how does it work? Tell me how it works, how much merit. Just don't worry about it. Just sort of lose yourself in that. You become almost like a beautiful stream in the woods, gurgling along. You ever encounter that? You go out for a walk and you hear this gurgling stream. It's like, wow, it's not telling you something. It's not speaking. It's not intellectualizing, but it's just this beautiful, calming sound. Mantras are like that. They put a sound like a pure stream into the world that's on fire. And so I would say, if you want to practice, and it's very simple, you can find it online on the website.
Yeah.
Put it into memorization and begin reciting it. It's a wonderful practice. So we'll do the transference, I guess, now.
May every living beings, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of haters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. respect to the triple jewel.